Ladies and gentlemen, the fog of war has cleared now, so I can now give you updates as to exactly what happened after the exfiltration of the second F-15 pilot by the Americans. The Iranians have now come up, the battle, so to say, was essentially fought on Iranian territory. So it's the Iranians that will get to tell us what exactly the Americans left behind after they took their pilot, and they left behind a lot of shattered, burnt out, and essentially shut down, or according to the Americans, destroyed military gear. So this is the bucket list that the Iranians are giving us as to what exactly they have the Americans left behind, so to say, after they went with the pilots. So one number F-15E, the original fighter jet that was shot down back then on is that Friday, that hosted the two fighter jet pilots that caused all this hullabaloo. Second, one number A10 Walter. You remember that very stubborn fighter jet I spoke to you about? The one with the tungsten body, the one that is essentially bulletproof. Four numbers MH16 Little Birds. They are helicopters. Those helicopters are particularly useful when it comes to extraction and exfiltration to larger, military birds. 4 units of it. 2 units UH-60 Black Hawks. Those are a helicopter to Black Hawks. You remember the movie Black Hawk Down? Those same Black Hawks. Two times C-130 Hackles. Those are refueling and transporting planes. 2 numbers of them. It was those planes that the Americans claimed that they could not be extracted because some of the tires were stuck. So because they could not be extracted and they did not want the planes to get into the hands of the Iranians, they had to blow them up, according to the Americans. While the Iranians insisted that they did not blow them up on ground, that the Iranians actually shot the planes down. And then 4 MQ-9 Reapers. MQ-9 Reapers are drones. So that is essentially the bucket list of what the Americans left behind in the Iranian territory, all shattered, all destroyed. Now, what are the implications of this? I'm sure that is what you want to know. As to exactly, one, President Trump said he is coming for them, on Tuesday. I'm going to analyze that tweet, that through to a social post in the next video. But President Trump essentially has promised the Iranians that if they do not open the Strait of Hormuz, that is going to come for all the power plants and all the bridges, on the Tuesday. If and when the Americans come, I want us to discuss what the implications of their coming will be, especially with respect to these numbers, of military gear and military birds that the Iranians took out, just so that the Americans could extract 2 military pilots. Now, when the Americans come on Tuesday, if they come, they are going to be coming with by far many more fighter jets. They are going to be coming with by far many more transport planes. They are going to be coming with by far many more refueling planes. They are going to be coming with by far more Black Hawks and by far more military as a military gear, which means that essentially the Iranians will have a lot more targets, a lot more fighter jet pilots to potentially pick up and capture instead of the 2 that came with just one F-15, a lot more fighter jets to shoot down, a lot more transport planes to shoot down. So the first implication is that this was essentially a test run. The Iranians were not exactly prepared for this kind of scenario. They did the best they could. And what eventually ended up the whole story was that, like I summarized to my wife back at home, I tell her that the Americans took the pilots while the Iranians took the planes. Do you understand? However, the Iranians have now learned that the pilots are more important than the planes. That was why the Americans willy-nilly sacrificed their planes just so that they could take the pilots. So this time around, the Iranians will be more careful to ensure that they will be getting not just the planes, so that those particular planes will not come back for the next up. They will also make sure this time around, as much as possible, to get the pilots who will be coming in larger numbers. Number 2 is that the Iranians are more likely to spread out their air defense systems. Don't forget that it is those air defense systems that were particularly pivotal to taking down that many planes, especially when you start to think in the direction of manpads. I spoke about manpads in one of my previous videos. Manpads are essentially air defense systems that are shoulder mounted. Like those bazookas in those old movies, or those old American movies we used to watch. Exactly. A manpad is roughly something close to a bazooka. But this time around, it's a bazooka that fires at planes. as against tanks, that are right in front of you on a ground. So they are more likely going to be dispersing their air defense systems, and they are more likely going to be dispersing their manparts to cover as much of the territory, square kilometer per square kilometer. The Iranians are also likely to be coordinating more, with the people in the hinterlands, the people, so to say, relatively in the rural areas, especially the old. You see, they did what the Yorubas equivalently call gudu gudu meje yaya mefa. Good, 7 of it, yeah, 6 of it. Particularly when the Americans came this time. How? Because they were the early response team. They were the early warning team. They were the first guys to actually start taking shots at those American planes and jets with their hunting rifles before the IRGCs and the Basiges and the actual state military apparatus start to come into the environment. So the Iranians this time around will most likely be coordinating with, organizing with, and planning with those particular, you understand, old folks in the villages and in the hinterlands, because they may not know exactly where the Americans will land, and the Americans may not land at designated areas where necessarily the Iranian military, the Basiges and the IRGCs are, especially because those folks in the hinterlands tend to be old people. You see, I saw a video where a particular old man, quite old, he was looking 70-ish, 80-ish, do you understand, actually came on TV, on Iranian TV, and said that he actually took some quite professional shots at some of those helicopters. For example, he said he was able to target the cockpit of the helicopter. So he knew where to target. He was able to target the fuel tank of the helicopter. He knew where to target. But he was not a designated military man. And that was because, according to him, he had a 10-month stint as a veteran during the Iraq versus Iran war back then in 1980 to 1988. Can you now see how the Americans inadvertently prepared the population of Iran for a war in 2026 with a war back then, in 1980? He learned back then. He kept that learning, He went back to civilian life. He was probably a farmer or a hunter or any of these domestic, professions. An old man in the hinterland living with his wife and his children. But when trouble came, when the Americans came with their jets, what did he do? He stopped being a farmer. He stopped being a hunter. He stopped being, any of those domestic. He essentially mentally wore his military garb again. He took his hunting rifle. Again, there is that culture of personal weapons in Iran. He took his hunting rifle and he essentially became a military actor of state. And it was the early warning signal, and the first responder when the Americans came with the jet and all. So essentially, the thesis of this video is that if and when the Americans come calling back on Tuesday, especially because Trump threatened that he's going to be coming back for the power plants and for the bridges, he will most likely meet Iran, the Iranians, the Iranian military, and even the Iranian people by far more prepared than the way they understand during this 2-day altercation over just 2 fighter jet pilots, where America lost that's such a colossal number of military gear. I hope you have learned something from me today. Again, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, don't forget to share, don't forget to comment and ask your questions, and I'll gladly answer them. See you in the next video. Thank you very much.